Took a little bit of a break from the Washington Commanders offensive coordinator search, but we're going to get back on that news because some new names have entered the fray. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into our damage report caused by the Carson Wentz trade. And Chris, are you ready to win money in FedEx, even if the Commanders don't? We talk about all of that right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Commanders fans? Welcome to this episode of the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. We're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube and the WUSA 9 Plus app on your Roku or your Amazon Fire Stick. And of course, we thank you for making us your first listen or view of the day. I'm David Harrison. He is Chris Russell. Both of us are credentialed members of the media covering your Commanders. Chris is doing it for Team 980, where he and Pete Medhurst literally just got off the air, 9 a.m. to noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. They're live with you there or anytime on the Odyssey app. And me, myself, I'm writing for Commander Country, part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation. Sorry, real quick for the slight delay in the live. If you can tell on YouTube, my camera is completely washed out. I have no idea, and I was trying to fix it. And Chris was very patiently telling me that we had to go live. So here we are in my just the light of knowledge is just shining on me, Chris. I'm about to drop some gems on people. I think that's what's happening.
Well, normally they're complaining about me and my apparently shaky digital hookup or internet or whatever. Which, listen, I control what I can control. You control what you can control. It's like you're shining, like you said, the beacon of knowledge from the mountaintop of Commander Land to Command Central. You are taking command of all. I don't know where I was going with that. Anyway, before I say something I regret, this episode is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOn NFL. All right, David, let's get to it because there's a lot of news. Like you mentioned, we've been separate the last couple of episodes of the week, so together to round out the week. And here's where we're at. We know that the Commanders have interviewed several candidates, including Ken Zampese, their quarterbacks coach, and Charles London, the Atlanta quarterback coach, and Pat Shurmur earlier this week. Now, according to John Keim of ESPN, and others have confirmed this as well, Miami assistant head coach and running backs coach Eric Studesville will interview on Monday, and Rams assistant head coach, tight ends coach Thomas Brown will interview at some point next week for the vacant offensive coordinator position. Now, before we get into the analysis of this, I, for one, am glad that they're not making a rush decision. Right. Of course, it's a process, but the bigger the process, the slower the process, I believe you truly get, A, ideas and input, and B, you also tend to make a better decision.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no reason not to cast a wide net here. This is a very important decision. In fact, we might look back on this, a year, 2, 3 years from now, and we might be able to point to this decision as being one of the ultimate decisions that led to Ron Rivera and the rest of the staff either being retained because they developed a winning program or eventually being let go because this move didn't work either. And, it ended up resulting in people, unfortunately, losing their jobs. I think out of those two names, I know we've got more to discuss here as we go through, but out of those two names, I think the one that really intrigues me the most is Miami coach Eric Studesville. And the reason being is because a lot of what Washington failed to do correctly last season was really exploit the short and intermediate part of the game to help set up the deep game, right? So much so, like in the NFL these days, a lot of people say the short passing game is an extension of the running game. Well, if you go to old school football, I wouldn't say old school, but like 90s, early 2000s, the running game is then used to set up the deep pass, play action, and open things up downfield. So if you look at that, well, then the short game really is an extension of that as well. It also is used by teams today to try to set up the deep ball. You look at the Miami Dolphins, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. They use those guys on a lot of screens, a lot of quick slants, and a lot of quick hitters. Where does that sound familiar? But they do it in order to try to set up the deep ball with a quarterback in Tua Tagovailoa that doesn't have the greatest deep arm in the National Football League. But the way they were able to find success before a lot of the concussion issues started happening, like the Miami Dolphins in the very first part of the season were really a very, very hot team and kind of stayed at least relevant right up until really the end of the year and the collapse, which is why some guys are losing their jobs. But the reason they were able to do that is they were able to take a quarterback that had enough arm, right? Not the greatest arm, but enough arm, enough athleticism, and enough intelligence in their scheme to make it work against what defense were trying to do. And the thing I like about them the most about it is they were creating a new approach to every opponent. And that is what you need in today's NFL as a coordinator that can look at every team as a blank canvas and paint a new picture, even if you're using the same colors.
Right. I know Thomas Brown is highly thought of. Just to add an element of knowledge on him, I know my colleague JP Finley over at 106.7 The Fan and Odyssey DC has been stumping for him. And of course, look, you come from Sean McVay's system, you're kind of thought of in a different way, right? Even though McVay and the Rams struggled, you're kind of thought of in a different way, whether you're really good or not. You're just given an ode to, well, okay, he's coming from McVay's system. And of course, McVay came from Jay Gruden and Mike Shanahan and so on, and the Grudens. You're automatically going to be given a little tip of the cap. One quick note on Studesville that you mentioned, and this is from our buddy Teresh at Tegna, who always comes up with unbelievable connections. He just posted one. Apparently, Studesville's wife at one point was a professional women's basketball player. She played in a league, and for a team in Chicago, the head coach of that team was Stephanie Rivera. I think you might know the connection.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, everybody should know.
Fair. So just keep that in mind. Not saying that will go into the decision, but just keep that in mind. That's a really interesting connection. Before we get to some of the comments here, just so we stay on track, Greg Roman parted ways with the Ravens on Thursday, David. Byron Leftwich was fired by the Bucs. Is there any better fit in your mind right now from the coaches we know are available than Greg Roman in terms of the stated fit of Ron Rivera?
I mean, from the stated what they want to do, no, there's not a better fit. And if everything goes sideways with Lamar Jackson, the way that a lot of people think it's going to in Baltimore, Lamar has had a lot of success, would probably be okay with joining Greg Roman. What concerns me, and I don't take it's not an RG3 thing, so don't take this as a slight towards RG3. I don't take anything that any one person says with 100% value just because we're all different. We all see things a little bit differently. But RG3 kind of tweeted out that, the whole thing with Roman is that a lot of receivers didn't want to go to Baltimore, not because of Lamar, but because of Greg Roman and because of that system. And it wasn't receiver friendly. So while I if you want to go run heavy and all that, that's fine. That's fantastic. But you got Terry McLaurin. You just invested a first-round draft pick in Jahan Dotson. You got Curtis Samuel. De'Ami Brown is still continuing to hopefully grow. And who knows what you're going to add here in the NFL draft here in a few months. You can't just come in here as an offense coordinator and say those guys don't exist. And I don't think Greg Roman would do that. Like, I don't think Ron Rivera and Martin Mayhew would let a guy come in and do that. So he's going to have to come up with something to scheme open the rest of the field. And I just kind of wonder if maybe that was Greg Roman, or maybe that was Greg Roman knowing Lamar Jackson's limitations and not wanting to expose them through his own scheme, force others to expose it. So I don't know. So and maybe that relationship's not going all that well, to be honest, behind closed doors. Maybe Lamar doesn't want to come to DC with Greg Roman. So, it definitely fits the mentality. I just, when I see a former player and someone who's obviously in the DMV area and probably has some friends around kind of talk about other players not wanting to play for this guy, especially such a valuable position in a passing league, that does give me a little bit of pause.
All right. Quickly, just quick shout outs to Joe Dixon, the Hawk, Eric, and Alonzo. Thanks, guys, for watching us live as we do this here. And Hawk actually brings up Go Leftwich. You cover the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as well for the Locked On Bucs podcast and writing. Some might know that, some might not know that. Is Byron Leftwich a viable candidate in your eyes for the Washington Commanders?
The problem with Byron is that the offense that the Buccaneers ran in 2020 when they won the Super Bowl, in 2021 when they set some more franchise records and, Brady had an MVP caliber season and they were doing all these great things, was mostly, I would say 70 to 80% Brady and Bruce Arians mentality, right? Then the 20% was Byron. Hey, dude, here's the playbook. Here's our scheme. Here's how we want to attack this opponent. We need you to go out there and basically conduct the orchestra, but the music has already been written, if I can put it to you that way. This year, the sheet music was much more Byron's, much less Tom's, because that's the way Todd Bowles runs it. Todd Bowles is more of a coach guy, where BA is much more of a player's guy. And so what my understanding is, Byron had, I would probably say 50 to 60% control of the offense, whereas before he had about 10 to 20% of the offense. So now you're seeing him with 40, 50% increase in responsibility and control, and you saw what it produced. It did not produce good, and it was very, very uncreative. The lack of creativity was frustrating from a week in, week out basis. That is ultimately concerning. And you're talking about a coach, Ron Rivera and Martin Mayhew, the GM, say they want to be a run-first team. This is the worst running team in the National Football League. And some of that, yes, is because of the offensive line issues, granted. But it's also because you never tried anything different. Week in, week out for 18 weeks, 17 games, and then the wild card. It was the same rushing attack, the same methods, the same plays the entire season, all the way down to the point where the Dallas Cowboys knew Tampa Bay's hand and arm signals on the field, even though they played them all the way back in week 1. And then they played them again in the wild card round. That's how much this offense did not develop as the season went on.
So it sounds like David Harrison, not exactly a...
Byron's a great guy. I would like to see Washington hire a different coordinator.
Okay, that makes sense. Coming up, where did it all go wrong for the Commanders in 2022? We'll try and answer that. If you want to chime in on that in the live chat, please go ahead. Where did it all go wrong for Washington in 2022? But first, this episode is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. As a small business owner, hiring manager, success in 2023 all depends on the team members you surround yourself with, right? You need good coordinators, you need good supervisors, you need good employees. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates that efficiently match open roles with the people that have the skills, value, and experience that you are looking for. They go beyond resume data by using insights from your job post company and their 875 million member profiles to put your job and post in front of the most qualified candidates. LinkedIn Jobs makes it easy to screen and rate applications based on your job applications, all on one platform. So here's what we want you to do. LinkedIn Jobs helps you, again, find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, thanks once again for making the Locked On Commanders podcast your first listen and view each and every day. Subscribe to the Locked On NFL podcast and get daily conversations on the biggest NFL stories, plus in-depth analysis of the biggest games with NFL key predictions every Friday, and Monday local insiders cover the weekend in game-to-game episodes. It's Locked On NFL, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, David, so you had an exchange from your episode this week. You got a post... And basically, just to summarize it, because we don't have time to read it all, a fan basically spelled out what he thought when he thought it went all wrong and when the season was doomed in 2022 for the Commanders. His answer was the Carson Wentz acquisition. And I would say, look, it's easy to say that in hindsight, but before we answer where we individually felt it all went wrong, is it possible in your mind to think that a season, a franchise's existence, or a franchise's existence within a season could go wrong 6 months before the season even began?
Here's what I would say. And so shout out to Impervious 99 on YouTube. And it wasn't actually a comment on my episode. It was on the one before that one, but I noticed it when I was going through comments. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Either way, the comment is the same, that, basically the season was lost on Carson Wentz. And the point that he makes is that the money, dedicated to Carson, because the Commanders did take the entirety of the Colts contract with Carson, prevented them from bringing in additional free agents. My, I guess, counterpoint to that point alone would just be, I don't know how many free agents were coming to Washington anyway. And quarterback-wise, Russell Wilson turned them down. He wasn't the only one that wasn't interested in coming to the DMV. In fact, Ben Standing of The Athletic actually wrote in an article recently that if Carson had his choice, he probably wouldn't have wanted to come to Washington himself. And, I think there's some validity to that. We all know why. The other part of it was the lack of development of Sam Howell. And that's kind of where this thing gets interesting, because this is where you really split into an alternative dimension. If Carson Wentz isn't on the roster, the Washington Commanders draft Sam Howell, I think probably in the 3rd round. You know what I mean? Like they're not waiting to the 5th round. They had a much higher grade on him. I think, from what I understand, they had a 2nd round grade on him. Mm-hmm. So the fact that he was there, they might have pulled the trigger in the 2nd round, to be quite honest with you then. But the fact that he was there in the 3rd, they definitely would have drafted him there. They drafted him in the 5th. I'm saying this from my perception to protect Carson Wentz's feelings and his ego. So that's a whole different mess that we can't possibly untangle on this show. So I understand that point, but I'm just going to say, like, there's really no way to untie that. Here's where I think the season was lost, Chris, because we've since found out that since the firing of Scott Turner, that Scott Turner was never really on board with Carson Wentz being the quarterback of his offense in the first place. Ron Rivera essentially pushed Carson Wentz on Scott Turner and said, this is going to be our quarterback. And Scott Turner's offense is much more designed for a quarterback that, as much as he's limited, is more like Taylor Heineke. Look at the quarterbacks that you have. You have Taylor Heineke, Sam Howell, Carson Wentz. 2 of the 3 are similar. One of them is the odd man out. Which one's the odd man out? The one that was forced to be the starter on Scott Turner. And when you have a coach, we would all love to say, be a professional, be a grown-up, and scheme for the quarterback you have, not the quarterback you want. But we're also all human beings. And when you are a coach in the National Football League and you've worked your way up to the highest level and all this other stuff, and you get forced to go with an asset that you don't think fits what you're trying to do, there's a part of you that is going to hesitate and resist altering your program because the guy driving it is not the guy you wanted in the driver's seat in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, and essentially, what does that? I mean, that kind of makes, if all of that is true, right? That kind of makes Scott Turner what? A scapegoat, right?
I mean, to a certain extent, yeah. I mean, look, there's the other side of the argument could be, well, Scott Turner, you work for Ron Rivera. Ron told you that this is our quarterback. Make a scheme that fits that quarterback. So do your job and do it. So I don't say anybody's a scapegoat legitimate. I just say, this goes back to, we've already brought up the Buccaneers, and I see somebody in the chat bringing up Jameis Winston. Dirk Cutter, when he was the offensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, wanted Marcus Mariota. He didn't want Jameis Winston. Now, Jameis came out in his rookie season, showed some flashes of why he was the #1 overall pick. Obviously, the Buccaneers aren't going to move away from him in their second year. Obviously, they want as much continuity as they can get for their quarterback, because everybody does. So when Dirk Cutter started getting head coaching interviews, they said, you know what, we'll make you the head coach. Lovie Smith, you go on to Illinois, and basically married Dirk Cutter to a quarterback he never wanted in the first place. And I will tell you that from the outside looking in, I don't have confirmation of this, but it very much looked like Dirk Cutter really never wanted and never decided to craft his offense around Jameis Winston for the next 3 years that they were together before Dirk ultimately got fired.
Right. I mean, it's got to kind of be the right fit. So as we, again, to me, I think the notion, look, that I was against a Carson Wentz trade. I was against a Carson Wentz acquisition. We talked about that way back in February. I have not been a fan of Carson Wentz really ever. Even when he was, lighting up the NFL, I still had significant questions. But that being said, I think it's too rich and too front running, if you will, for lack of a better term, to say, well, it all went wrong or mostly went wrong the day they made that move. Now, one thing I will say, whatever happened leading up to this, where I think this season spiraled out of control, and it's easy for me to say this, is, David, we were both at MetLife Stadium in early December. The Commanders were up 10-0, and they had won, I think, 4 in a row, or they had won 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 6 or whatever it was. And they were in total control of their destiny, and they were up 10-0, and they were looking for more. And then it all unraveled from there at MetLife Stadium, and they tied the New York Giants in a game that, quite honestly, they should have won, at least in my opinion, and they should have won it and could have won it in overtime. We don't have to revisit the semantics, but to me, that's the turning point of the season. That's where everything went wrong. Yes, that was with Taylor Heineke at quarterback. And yes, of course, it's easy to say, well, when Ron went back to Carson Wentz, I think it started from there when they blew that opportunity to win that game. And as we know,
Yeah.
One game could have been the difference and might have been the difference in them making the playoffs and not making the playoffs, and certainly having nothing to play for in week 18 against the Dallas Cowboys. So to me, I'm going to simplify it and say, yeah, a lot of things led to it, but that one day at the MetLife Stadium when they had a 10-0 lead in the first quarter against the Giants and blew it, and then blew it again in overtime, that's where everything went wrong.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, with the Carson Wentz trade notwithstanding, like this team still could have and should have arguably been a playoff team despite the trade being made. And I know there's a lot of confusion. Look, here's what I'll say about so first of all, the reporter or the quote of Scott Turner not being on board with Carson Wentz came from Ben Standing again of The Athletic. It's Ben Standing Day here on the Locked On Commanders podcast. Doing great work there. And, so there's some people who say, did Dan want Carson? Did Ron want Carson? Look, here's what I'll say. Ron, Chris, you know this. Ron stood up on the table for Carson all season long with us and said, I'm the one who brought him in. I'm the one who said this guy's the guy. I'm the one who did this. Now, did Dan behind the scenes say something and push him into it? Possible.
Right.
But I will just say Ron, forward facing in the public, said he is the guy that he picked. He's the QB1, never gave him a competition, et cetera, et cetera. So it is what it is. Either way, Scott Turner, again, being saddled with a quarterback he doesn't want, again, there's two ways to look at that. It's not fair to the offense coordinator to do that, but also at the same time, offense coordinator, be a professional and craft an offense for the guy that you have. I would agree with both sides, honestly. So it is, it just kind of an is what it is moment. But like you said, this team's still a playoff team, even with that move.
Absolutely. And we see you guys in the comment section, Matthew and Alonzo and Joe, we understand, like, we're not saying that we absolutely definitively know whether it was Dan's call or Ron's call. Ron has said over and over and loudly said it in Chicago after week 6 that it was his decision that, whatever. Hey, Ron's the grand poobah of the organization. I'm going to assign it to Ron. The question is what, to me, more what Scott Turner's role in it was as opposed to Dan Snyder, but that's neither here nor there. Either way, we're going to come on back and tell you how you can win, because the Commanders rarely do, at FedEx Field. But you can't do it when? We'll answer that question, plus a couple of divisional picks for the playoffs. But first, guys, this episode brought to you by our friends at Built Bar. That's right. If you're looking for a delicious treat instead of a bag of chips this weekend for the NFL divisional playoffs, we have the suggestion for you, the perfect suggestion, and it's healthy for you. And it's our friends at Built Bar. That's right. Perfect for your New Year's resolution, perfect for dessert, a meal replacement, perfect for football. And speaking of perfect, how about peanut butter brownie? Oh, it's perfection personified. Coconut almond, churro. So good. Only about 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, whopping 17 grams of protein in most bars. And now, guess what, guys? We normally tell you you can go to built.com to get your orders, and then you got to wait and all that stuff. But now you can go to your local Walmart or your local Sam's Club, run on in, pick up a 4-bar box or a 13-bar box at Sam Club. Get whatever kind of flavors you want. Brownie batter, churro, coconut puffs, double chocolate, cookies and cream. Oh, it's all there for you. And you are going to be one happy camper. And you can thank us later.
All right, guys, we all know the Washington Commanders did not do nearly enough winning in FedEx Field, in the confines of FedEx Field during the 2022 NFL season. Hopefully more to come with a brand new offensive coordinator and a new starting quarterback for the season, whether it's Sam Howell or not. Whoever starts week 1 will I'll say most likely be different than who started week 1 of last season. Actually, with the Scott Turner revelation, I'll say it's absolutely going to be somebody different. That's a whole other discussion. We will get it further into the quarterback search as we get more into this offseason. But first, guys, FedEx Field has opened a sports book. So even if the Commanders aren't winning, you can go win. And something, Chris, that is growing in popularity. I write a game-by-game betting line article for Inside the Wizards about whoever the Washington Wizards and is these same game props. And I will say, the Inside the Wizards same game prop line that I dropped had 2 plus 244 odds, which means if you bet 100 and you hit it, you win $244. You turn 100 into almost $400. It hit, by the way. I'm not saying I'm a genius. I'm just saying I got that one right. These in-game parlays and these in-game bets, Chris. I mean, you could see somebody like 2-minute warning in the second half. Washington's up or down 3, whatever it is. The line on them winning the game changes based on what's happening in the real game. They go to the FedEx Sportsbook. maybe they make themselves some money. It could be a lot of fun. It could also be a little bit dangerous. So please be responsible if you're going to participate.
Yeah, here's the thing. There's all sorts of restrictions, so you're going to have to check out all the rules and all that. I've heard a bunch of different things in terms of what's allowed, what's not allowed. But more importantly, this is an extra revenue stream for the Commanders organization that, quite honestly, David, I mean, just by sheer nature, they've seen their fan base go from 91,000 in terms of attendance 10 years ago to 51,000 a year ago. And sure, it was up this year. It was the third highest jump in terms of percentage, up 10+%. They did a bunch of different things, but they need as much revenue to come through that building and that location as much as they can. So whether it's on game day or whether it's on a Monday or a Wednesday, you can go to lunch, you can go to dinner, you can watch games, you can watch other sports. You can watch the NFL on Thursday night, Monday night, so, what have you. Obviously, again, there will be game day restrictions and game day guidelines that are different than any other day. So go, again, check it out on the Commanders site. But I think this is an important day if you think about, right, some of the things we talk about with Dan Snyder, he doesn't have, or he's thought to not have as much in terms of liquid cash as other owners do for signing bonuses and to be aggressive and competitive. If that's true, and again, that's an if, and if he's the owner for however many months he is, this might be an extra revenue source and stream that the organization can then justify going out and being a little splashier in free agency, especially with Carson Wentz's numbers coming off the book. So that's the real fit. That's the intriguing thing for me. Plus it gives Commanders fans maybe an extra opportunity to be more invested in the building and to not think, oh, FedEx Field, boy, we're stuck with this place. There's nothing good about it. Hey, you know what? It might not be the best game day experience, but maybe on a Tuesday afternoon, if you knock off early, it's a good place to go for happy hour and a meal and to lay down some money. So I think it's a good thing for the Commanders.
Yeah, and we all know, too, the DMV is a melting pot, right? There's people from all over, living in the DMV, especially in the immediate D.C. area. It's a place that, a fan of the Bears can go and hang out and watch sports and do things. And look, if this goes well, again, there's a new stadium complex that's going to get built somewhere someday at some point. And if this goes well, it might inspire them to do it. It's obviously going to transfer. Maybe they do it even bigger and it's even nicer and it's an even better spot for football fans to go. But
no doubt,
Chris, with all the what ifs, there's a whole lot of maybes and could be's, and maybe Bryon Greasy gets his shot to be an offensive coordinator after 1 year of being a quarterback coach. That would be a lot of fun to watch. For everybody else, it's business as usual per Jason Wright, the president of the Washington Commanders.
Yeah, and it should be business as usual. I mean, whether it is or it isn't, I mean, that's what they're going to say. They're not going to say, no, guys, you know what? Like, we've got the clamps on us. We can't spend a dime, so forget about it. They're not going to say that. So whether it's true or not, you hope that business is indeed as usual. And I believe largely it will be. I mean, I'm sure it's complicated because there is this cloud hanging over, but in some ways, I just know this, in talking to somebody very, very, very high up in the chain a couple of weeks ago at FedEx Field, the sense that I got was exactly what Jason is saying, and that they're not going to be paralyzed or punished because Dan Snyder is, again, trying to sell the team. Obviously, we will continue to warrant those developments. But, David, a couple of quick divisional playoff picks because, of course, the Commanders are not playing this weekend, but that doesn't mean we don't have good quality playoff football. These lines, courtesy of Bet Online. Jacksonville at Kansas City, the Chiefs 9-point favorites, the over-under 52, and the Giants and the Eagles in an NFC East division special. The Eagles -7.5, over-under 47.5. David, I've got the Kansas City Chiefs and I've got the Giants as my two picks. Giants plus the 7.5, Chiefs minus the 9. Who you got?
So that's against the money line or the spread, or against or is that money line?
Yeah, I'm gonna go against the spread. I'm sorry, I kind of I should say straight up. I've got the Chiefs and I've got the Eagles, but I don't feel great about the Eagles.
Yeah, straight up, I'm going Chiefs and Eagles, and honestly, so I've actually got a 4-game parlay against the spread on all these games, which means I'm probably going to lose all my money. The Kansas City Chiefs by 9, I am taking that line. Chiefs by 9. and I'm taking the Philadelphia Eagles by 7.5.
All right. That makes sense. And Sunday's action should be a doozy as well. The Cincinnati Bengals at the Buffalo Bills in the game that we didn't really get to see because of the tragedy with Damar Hamlin. The Bills at home favored by 5.5, over under 49. And then the Cowboys and the 49ers finish it off at Levi Stadium Sunday evening. 49ers and Brock Purdy -4 and 46.5 is the line there. I've got the Cincinnati Bengals winning on the road, therefore covering the +5.5.
Yep.
And I'm gonna go with the 49ers, but I'm gonna say the Cowboys cover, and it's a 3-point game. But I'm gonna pick the 49ers to win.
Got you. So yeah, I'm going Niners money line and with the points. I'm taking the Niners by 4 in my parlay, and I am taking the Bengals plus the 5.5. So if the Bills win by 3. All right, we'll be okay. Money line, I would still go Bengals, to be quite honest with you, which is why, obviously, if I'm going to go Bengals money line, there's no reason not to take the points along with it in my parlay. That is just doing a straight up against the spread parlay. I don't know, felt a little bit creative. It's to celebrate the new sportsbook. Wanted to hit all of them against the spread. So I've got Bengals there as well.
I like it. As you know, I was Daddy Warbucks last weekend in the NFL Super Wildcard round. I won $250 on the Jaguars on Saturday night on Bet Online.
Yeah, that's a good bet.
And then I came back with a couple of multiple bets against the Cowboys. I did not win that as much, but I did win on the Cowboys against the Buccaneers. All right, shout out to Johnny as well, who joined the fray here. He's optimistic about the offseason. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, everyone that's been in the chat for this live broadcast. And whether you're listening live or watching live, or listening or watching on not delay, but at a different time, we appreciate all of you for being with us and for caring about the team and supporting the show and supporting our sponsors. It's very important to us, and we appreciate you, one and all. Thanks again for making us and the Locked On Commanders podcast your first listen or view of the day. Now make your second listen and view the Locked On Sports Today podcast. From the games that matter to the biggest stories in sports, Locked On Sports Today provides them for you. Available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to hop in, it's Locked On Washington Commanders at gmail.com, or hit us up on DM at LO Commanders, at LO Commanders. Of course, David on Twitter at DHarrison82, me at WrestleMania621, so you can be a part of the show. We will be back next week with more on the offensive coordinator, the ownership search, and we will start our position by position review for the 2022 season. Thanks again for joining us right here on the Locked On Commanders podcast.